Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Smalley, and I am the Product Manager for 2020 Fusion. And welcome to the webinar, which will hopefully allow you to learn a lot more about 2020 Fusion version 6. Version 6 has been in development for quite some time and represents the culmination of a fairly intensive and far-reaching development exercise, the centerpiece of which has been the redesign of the new rendering engine that we have in the product. Beyond that, we looked at a few other important areas as well, and a lot of it was based upon user feedback, upon visiting customers and reaching out to various parts of our user group. We found that there were some key areas that definitely demanded some additional focus, and one of those in particular was the new name views, our name views functionality. So we've also taken an opportunity to look at that area as well. As you'd expect, with any release of Fusion, there are quite a wide range of feature developments and feature enhancements. Some on the grand and major scale, as I've indicated on the rendering and the name view side of things, and some much more on the smaller side, little usability-based issues, but ones that are no doubt just as important for many of our users. So I think it's probably time to just dive in and have a look at version 6 in action. So I'm just going to take you off the PowerPoint mode here. So I just wanted to take a little example design, very basic, but it will help us walk through the actual process itself. What I'd like to share with you first of all, if we go directly to our perspective view, and one of the key areas, as I say, that we focused on is the side of rendering, not only to leverage improvements in the engine itself, but also to make it simpler to use. So if I can draw your attention to this area here to start off with, these are our new Fusion renders. We used to have a gallery control in version 5 and earlier, but we've very much simplified that so that the renders are now accessible at the top level, and also you can choose your favorite renders to add to the quick access toolbar, much as you already can for other buttons. And we've reduced it down to simply 6 renders based upon what we believe to be the standard sort of use cases that exist for planning. So from a rendering point of view, we have a wireframe. We also have a white fill option, a color fill, and a draft render. Now those names you'll recognize from version 5 and earlier. What's going on under the hood is slightly different, but the end result is exactly the same. So if I went back to a plan view, so you can see your white fill, a color fill, and a draft all operating as you would expect. Those are available also in the perspective view and also in the elevation view. One slight difference is that the higher quality renders, our research and our customer consultations suggested to us that there was no need, no demand for the higher quality renders in plan and elevation views. So in these views, those are actually ghosted, not available. But obviously where they really are in demand are the area, in the area of perspective, the full graphical presentations. So we have, in a perspective view, we have entry-level render called presentation, and we set a target for this render to be around about the sort of the 5 to 10 second mark for a simple render. For a simple design, the render takes very little time at all. Obviously that took about 3 or 4 seconds, no more. For a more complex design, and we'll see some of those a little bit later, the render time will increase, but for this quality, the presentation render, certainly no more than 10 to 15 seconds, even for very big designs. And as you can see, we already at this level have a very high quality level of rendering. We have, I think you'll probably agree, we've now got the ability to represent highly reflective surfaces, far better than we ever have done before. And we also have other nice areas like refraction on glassware. We'll do a close-up in a moment on that. In fact, we can do that right now. So if we have a close-up, you can see here that when we focus in on the glass, you're actually getting the true refraction around the glass here, and also we're getting really, really strong detail on our washing machine here. The other interesting thing about these views, or about these renders, certainly our presentation renders, the presentation plus render, is that unlike in version 5, they take advantage of our background processing technology. Now, you remember we introduced that in version 5 and version 4 for certain actions such as printing and for movie generation and for panorama generation, so that you could actually carry on working and performing other tasks in the meantime. So if we go to, we'll go to a different view here. So here's a view that's now rendering. Now the lovely thing is here, it's fully interruptible. So we could immediately say, no, I don't want to do that. I want to go back to the wireframe. Or indeed, if we render it again, we can visit other palettes as an example, or interrupt and go directly to a different view. So we've got full flexibility, and that's because this rendering methodology is taking full advantage of the background processing technology that we added earlier on in version 5 and version 4. That now extends to the rendering itself and gives us a whole lot more power. The rendering itself, as I say, also we have now our progress bar in the top corner here. And if, for example, I was to extend things a little bit here, we could perhaps have two perspectives going at the same time. So obviously it's now re-rendering, but what I can have now is I can have one render going on in window number 1 and a second render going on in window number 2. And you get independent progress occurring on those reporting against with separate progress bars. So the nice thing here is full flexibility. And obviously I can drop down to a whiteboard render here or a wireframe, all entirely independently. And if, for example, I were to, in this render, just do something as simple as change the viewpoint, then the render will reinitiate, and of course I can still carry on performing other tasks in here whilst that renders. Similarly, interrupting, if I wanted to interrupt by undoing, as an example, it will immediately interrupt that. And just to show you the science behind this, if we just change one of our viewpoints here, and we'll switch to a task manager view, so bear with me a second. If we have task manager running, you'll see that we have a little background process here, and there's the Fusion symbol to indicate that Fusion is running in a background task. So what that means is that the actual active process is entirely independent of the application running in the foreground. So that gives you great opportunity, like you've not had before really, to fully explore Fusion's capabilities without being hamstrung by waiting for a particular render to take place. The other interesting thing is Fusion has a degree of caching within the new rendering system. So if we were to wait for this render to complete, as long as there's no changes in the geometry, i.e. you haven't added products, deleted products, moved products, then it does give you the opportunity to basically reverse any action that you've taken, and Fusion will cache that. So, for example, in this case, on this particular view, it might be the case that I will just simply change the position. And as you'll see, it will re-render now. But once that render is completed, Fusion will cache to a certain degree the previous image that we had. So therefore, just to test that out, once we hit 100%. Nearly there. Once we hit 100%, we can undo the function, and it's immediately returned to that previously cached view. So that's a very powerful thing in its own right as well. So the rendering engine, obviously, this now gives you the opportunity to really push the product further and harder than you have before, and there will no longer be any unnecessary waits for things to complete, which is really, really positive. In conjunction with the new rendering system, we took a good strong look at named views, and in version 5 and earlier, the named views functionality was a little difficult to understand and appreciate, mainly because for two reasons. One, the named views were hidden away, so they were in little gallery controls under the plan, elevation, and perspective, respectively. And the other thing was that you had to always consciously save your named views. So your named views were something that you always had to be mindful of. In version 6, we kind of reversed that. And in version 6, effectively everything is a named view, and every action that you take is automatically saved within that named view. So let's consider something simple first of all. We'll go to a plan view, okay? What we should first look at is the connectivity across all of the views. So we have a plan view here called star plan. There's a little asterisk here. And in elevation, for every wall, we have a star wall, wall 2, wall 3, wall 4. And then in our perspective view, we have a star perspective. These are what we describe as our main views, and these are automatically generated for you by Fusion every time you create a new design. And as you add a wall or subtract a wall, Fusion will update automatically to show faithful reflections of the walls, the wall count that you have in the elevation view, and also will always give you a star plan and a star perspective. Now, the behavior of those views are all interconnected. So, for example, in a plan view, in the star plan, we'll do something drastic. If we hide all of our layers, so that will be reflected in each of our elevation, starred elevation views, and so that would be reflected in our perspective view. If we turn them all on again, so that's reflected in each of our views again. So we have one binding element across plan, elevation, and perspective, where your layers and your lighting settings are all consistent. So any decisions that you make in this star plan will affect the star-based elevation views and the star-based perspective view. And that will allow you to have a single thread running through the solution for your turning on and off layers. Of course, things like dimensioning and other elements, annotation of the design, they will remain independent as they were, but they will be saved to those respective named views. So, what can you then do in the context of a given view type? Well, we're in plan view here, and what we have here, as well as the automatic name views, we have the ability to create additional name views. So we've got a little button here called Add Name View, and it's a little bit like Excel, where you have the ability to add more tabs. So this completely replaces the old name view system. So if we add a new name view, you'll see at first glance it's absolutely identical to the name view that we had selected when we clicked on the button. So to all intents and purposes, this new name view is the same as planned until I do anything with it. And the key here to be aware of is that we have a little indication here of the pink background, which tells us that the layer and lighting settings will have will interact, they'll reciprocate between the plan, the user-generated plan, the user-defined plan, and the main plan here. So again, at the moment, everything I do within this view, so again, I'll do that experiment of hiding all the layers, will be reflected in the main view. However, there is a way then of setting things up so that we have the ability to, here we go, yep, setting things up so we have the ability to have different layers displayed in different views. So pretty much the same functionality as we had with name views before. But what I can do is obviously in a user-defined name view, I have the ability to separate or divorce the name view from the main views in terms of either the lighting and the layer settings. So let's just take an example here of one that I set up earlier. Now this is one with no decoration. So what I did here was I deselected the layer settings option here to make it independent in terms of the Fusion's layers from the main view. And as you can see, when it's separated, when you detach it, it turns to a different color in background. In this case, it's blue, to show that it is independent in some way from our main views. So if I go to my area here with all my decorative items on, you'll see that all my layers are indicated as being shown. If I go to my layer where I've deliberately hidden away all my decorative items, then you can see that they have been hidden away here and deselected. So this is a very powerful way of then building up a whole series of views across, within individual view types, or indeed across other view types for different purposes. So effectively, we could do anything here. So in this independent view here, if we divorce the layers, that will now turn blue, and then we can start thinking about doing other things. So we could turn off the decorative, we could turn off perhaps everything except worktops, perhaps. Turn off our lights, and then we're just left with the worktops and our advanced graphics and our appliances. So you have full potential to define and save, because Fusion saves them automatically for you. At this point, I don't have to do any further saving. That name view has been saved. And then I can just basically toggle between each of those respective views with the material, with the elements that I've decided are important to be displayed. Similarly, that operates in elevation view as well. So the same concept. Here's my primary wall here, the north wall, and this will show obviously everything on that wall. But again, I've created an option here where all of the decorative items are removed. This could be thinned out further still, so that it becomes an effective plan for anyone in an architectural context or submitting to a fitter, and so on and so forth. And we still have in Fusion the ability to create, obviously, additional name views comprising multiple walls. So if we had a series of walls that were parallel, we still have the ability to take advantage of Fusion's primary and secondary wall functionality within the context of the name view system. And there is full synchronicity here between the automatically generated name views and the walls in the mini plan. So if I click on the mini plan, it will automatically move me to wall 2 or wall 3, not so interesting, wall 4, and so on, and then finally back to wall 1. Again, if I drop onto a wall that a name view that doesn't isn't one of the name views, then the behavior is slightly different. The user notes here in the name view change slightly, but you can still click on a different wall to make your specific name view show something different. Let's move on to perspective and show how we can take full advantage here. So again, the same concept applies here. So I have a perspective view, and I have a series of user-defined name views here. So my perspective name view is currently using a theme of none. And here's one thing that's very interesting to show you. in version 5 and earlier, it was incumbent upon the user to put a little bit of minimum effort into the design to be able to get a reasonable level of lighting. Well, in version 6, we have sort of repurposed the theme of none to actually use what we call a lighting rig. So default artificial lighting is applied if you are not using any of our standard themes. So without any effort at all, a design is lit to a reasonable level of quality, and for many for whom the intricacies of lighting is not so important. They just want a well-lit scene in as quick a time as possible. The new theme of none may well be all you will need with the design. And this room still has a window, it still has doors, but in this context, using the default lighting gives us enough to work with. In addition to the default lighting rig, you can still add your own user-defined lights, so that is still possible. And going back to the connections between the main name views and the user-defined name views, if I then go to my close-up, obviously what you will see is that we have set this to operate. This will follow the lighting and the layer settings of our main view. Obviously, at the point where I then, if I go to one here where I can choose a different render, I have turned off the lighting settings here, and this is one where I've just set myself to use a night-based theme. So there's full power to work through with the application, and later on I'll show you another room where we have a whole series of themes set up to show different scenes times a day. In fact, we might do that now, so let's just wait for that one to complete. So if we just open another room, if we go to perspective, so here we have, for example, sunset view. And bear in mind that this is the highest quality render that we're working to. This is the Presentation Plus render. You'll see how, even for a much larger design, the render time is still pretty impressive, and the quality is very good indeed. So things to focus on here, and this is where a lot of the complementary work that we've been doing with our content is that many of the products in this design have come in from 2020 Cloud. And 2020 Cloud is obviously a content initiative that we've been running with now for a good couple of years. The Fusion version 6 rendering system is now fully optimized to work with 2020 Cloud products. So if you're adding anything from our decorative item, for example, or an appliance from a manufacturer's catalog, that is fully optimized to work with the render engine that we now have. So again, things to look at. Great refraction on the glassware here. We also have a really good strong grain on the cabinets here. Good representation of the porcelain on the sink, and good detail on the interiors of the appliances here. So, and obviously, as I say, basically what one can do, and as you can see, in this case, some of these renders were created before this presentation. And when I talked about the caching, a really nice aspect of the functionality is, again, I talked about how that if you don't make any changes in the geometry, Fusion will cache an image of the last render that you've done. So interestingly, this is using the lighting rig on its own. So again, no additional lights have been added here. So that, as I say, may well be enough. But the caching element means that going into a presentation to a customer, the customer isn't necessarily sitting waiting for the renders to take an age. Obviously, of course, if you make any modifications, if the customer decides that they don't want that door style after all, or if they want to swap out a particular appliance for another, then of course everything has to re-render. But there is now the prospect or the possibility that you will be able to create your designs in anticipation of a customer coming in and using creative ideas such as showing the same scene from different times of day, or from different points of view, or as we saw in the plan and elevation areas, just decluttering, so removing all of our decorative items. You have all of this great flexibility to present the renders or the layouts exactly as you would wish. Okay, let's think about moving on to some other areas. Just a couple of notes on the renders. I mean, obviously, we have now rationalized down to 6 render types. So a couple of notes here. One, you will have noticed that we have no longer a planning mode. And the planning mode tended to be used when you were working with the higher quality renders that existed in version 5 and earlier. Because those renders took such a long time to generate, the planning mode was very useful because you could drop down to a planning mode while still having that render selected and still make modifications or plans to the design. But because we now have these 4 planning renders, which are frankly so quick that moving between them takes a split second, this is effectively the equivalent of working with a planning mode. Here I am in the draft render here. So rather than having a superfluous button here, users can now simply drop down to one of the planning renders, make any modifications quickly and easily, and then reapply the render for Presentation or Presentation Plus. For many, Presentation Plus Presentation might be the chosen render to operate in because, as I say, these are averaging somewhere between 5 and 15 seconds, depending on the size and the complexity of the design. So that was something that we felt that was superfluous and no longer required. Also, conspicuous by their absence, we have now removed the artistic effects renders. Again, consulting our customers, on average, our customers were telling us that these weren't used hardly at all, and so we decided to focus on the renders that most mattered to everybody. Okay, one other element just to focus on is that Fusion's backgrounds now operate only through working through the portals. Portals being doors and windows to everyone else. So, for example, if I were to move slightly further out of this design here, what we used to have in Fusion was a slightly odd effect with backgrounds that they would envelop the whole design. But if we probably just need to go out just a tiny little bit further. And so even when you were trying to get a view from effectively outside of the design, you're often presented with this slightly odd situation where a design, you would start seeing the background above or below the outside of the room. So this now gives you an opportunity to get slightly broader angle here, and as you can see, this room is slightly a rectangular shape, and from the viewing position I'm in, this is quite a pleasing viewing position, but we're not now subject to all the clutter of the background appearing over and above above and below the actual scene itself. And as you can see, just using undo there, it cached those last two renders, so it did not need to reapply those for us. Okay. Now let's have a look at a few other bits and pieces. So we'll close this design for now. And we'll return to our simple design. And we'll run through a few little bits and pieces in terms of sort of usability now. Very helpful to our users is the fact that we now have, we always seek to follow Microsoft standards, and not only in terms of development, but also in terms of user interface. So keeping up with every release of Microsoft Office, we tend to try and follow the same standards that they've implemented. So one of those elements is, and I'm just going to have to, oh no, I can see it here. Microsoft have a function in Office 2016 called Tell Me What You Want to Do. So, and it's really a locator of elements within the interface. So, for example, if in Fusion's case we were looking for style details, as you start typing in the name of what you're trying to see, and forgive me, there we go. So I typed in ST, and we got some options here that appear. So anything containing an ST will appear, but obviously if I then refine that by typing in more, then it will also refine the selection here. And this is just a simple, quick and easy way of helping you get to an element that may be in a different ribbon, one of the other tabs, or you have completely forgotten where to go, but you know what you're looking for, you just don't know where it is. So this is a very useful mechanism of doing so as well. Also, in terms of logging into to Fusion, as you know, you have to log in to use 2020 Cloud. We've made that consistent with Microsoft now, so that the login area for 2020 Cloud is now very much like you'd see in Microsoft products in the top right-hand corner. But otherwise, no difference in that respect. But in addition to tell me what you want to do, we've also fully revamped Fusion's help file system. So again, when you click on the one of your F keys, you'll now be taken to a fully updated edition of 2020 Fusion, where you can search for any elements within the application, and that is now fully up to date in terms of version 6. So as you can see here, when we talk about the management of our new named views, there's full information and guidance on all elements, not only of version 6, but also for all versions before as well. And there's also, it starts off with a very friendly landing page, and obviously there are different, you can either conduct your own searches or work your way through the basics or click on particular areas. There's also hyperlinks to various other areas that are helpful. So the 2020 Spaces website, support, our user community, and or if you wanted information on the training courses as well. So a good wealth of information here, and version 6, as I say, the help system is now fully updated to complement the functionality that we have. Let's look at a couple of other things. We're back on the subject of usability now, and in version 5 now, in fact Fusion since the dawn of time, if you wanted to modify an item, it was historically only possible to do so one at a time. If you click on an item, you then go to the Items tab, and if you wanted to, for example, adjust its height to a particular value, then you could do that. The moment you selected a second item, then of course much of this interface would become ghosted because it was only possible to do so one at a time. So in version 6 now, it's actually possible to select multiple items and make those modifications at the same time. Now, if you'll notice what's happened in the interface here, areas where there is commonality between those products will be shown. So, for example, here the height of these two wall cabinets here are both 720, so that will be shown, but they have different lengths. So, thinking beyond this very, very simple example, if you had a run of cabinets, all of which you needed to modify the height or a particular attribute, then select them all and make that adjustment as you see fit. So here I can change them to both 700, and it updates them for both of those elements. So I'll undo this for now. But this equally applies to other elements in here. So their relative position in the design. So these are both 1400 high, so you could select those and raise them higher in the elevation view. Or if you wanted to change their reporting category, as an example, or indeed any other elements. It might be that you want to change, whether whether it's possible to annotate them, or whether they can have cornice or pelmet applied. So we've opened up a lot more of the Items tab to allow you to perform multiple actions the same action on multiple items at the same time. So it's a very useful time-saving enhancement that we've added there. Okay. We'll go back to our plan view. Let's have a look at our plan view here. Other elements that we've added. Fusion has a variety of functions, such as the ability to add products using the single or multi fixture tool or the measurement tool, but also things like our manual dimensioning tool, which rely on what we call snapping points or hotspots. In version 5 and earlier, it was sometimes difficult to sort of visualize where you were actually snapping to, because sometimes there would be many areas where it was picking up upon. And there was no real indication, no real support for the user as to exactly what they were touching. So in version 6, if we use any of these sort of modes now, it's supported by a little bit of extra information. So what you can see here is as I hover over a snapping point here, I see a little green square. The green square tells me it's a target point to snap to. And of course, if I move elsewhere, other target points will become apparent. And of course, if I'm in certain parts of the design, it may be very, very busy, but at least you'll be able to see the transition from a target point to a selection point. So what we have here then is, as I hover over a point, if I were to click on that point, it will then turn into a cross to indicate that I have clicked. And now, as I am here in my dimensioning mode, as I move around the design, other options become apparent. So here is a green target point here. Now the obvious place I'm going to probably want to measure to, for example, might be here, just for this particular example. So if I click here, once clicked, my little indicators disappear, and I have my dimension rail applied as I've wanted here. And that can be used across a variety of areas. So not only these respective dimensioning tools, but also for the measurement, and also for adding linear items as an example. So if you're adding a piece of lint for worktop manually, something along those lines, then that would equally be possible. So that's a nice little additional benefit there. Other usability elements, let's take a look at, we'll go back to our view palette, and we'll go to our item list. We've added some functionality in this area here, and it's an option. For some people, selecting an item in an item list and then possibly wanting to edit their description, they would click on that item and then open up a dialog here. Obviously that includes a lot of mouse movement, but for others we were asked to consider whether it would be possible just to simply double click on the entry here. What double click normally does is, in a different context, is if you select something in the item list, it will bring the items ribbon to the front. So for some, it might be best to operate just bringing the items ribbon to the front. For others, they actually want to edit the description and do that as well. So with a preference that's set, we have a very handy pocket guide, a what's new guide, which tells you where that is set. You can simply double click on the item, make any additions. So there we go, we'll say modified, and we hit OK, and so that's been achieved. So that's one minor little bit of usability enhancement there. Let's also think about another element here. Other areas where customers would sometimes trip up on is that they would, if they were putting items in different style groups from the default. Obviously Fusion has these concepts of style blocks, so you always have the default style, but perhaps they may, as an example, wish to have items occupying a different style block. So let's just select, we'll change the selection style for this particular item to a different one, and we'll change something completely different. And so we have this item in a different style block. And what occasionally has been the case for some of our customers is that if they were to replace that item with another, Fusion would only ever historically replace that item in the default style block, as opposed to the additional style block that have been created. So if we hit replace now, what Fusion version 6 will do, subject to a preference, is give you the choice. So it will give you a little pop-up saying, okay, you're replacing this item here. It currently resides in this style block. You've got a choice to put the replacement item in the same style block. So in this case, this was the elm door style, or put the replacement in the default style. Well, in this case, I'll say, yeah, okay, I'll pop that in the default style. But, so this gives us a really good opportunity to add extra sort of safety valves, extra checks within the application as you go along. Now, that as I say, that's the user accessible preference in Fusion's options area, and you can set that to either constantly remind you, or constantly continue with placing it in the default style, or to place it automatically in the style that it occupies. So if it was in style A, it would automatically put it in that style block for you as well. Let's move on. Okay. Other enhancements. In conjunction with our name views work, we also use this as an opportunity to consider our numeric annotation functionality. What we found was that numeric annotation was often very confusing for people, with different types of annotation, and the potential for you in different name views to employ different numeric annotation mechanisms. So what we've done is we've taken some steps to make sure that if you're using numeric annotation, the mechanism is consistent across all of your views. So, for example, we still have in our plan view the ability to set unit name or order code. That's unchanged. And in our elevation view, we still have the ability to follow the same mechanism as planned. But what we've done here now is we've rationalized the options that we have in terms of numeric annotation. And what we used to have was two options, numeric annotation and item list annotation. Now that's been replaced simply by one entry called item list index. So the item list index will give you numeric annotation, and that is what we're displaying here. But it is the item list now that drives the mechanism for the sorting method that you use. So you'll be familiar with an item list, you have the annotation index sorting methods. Well, now the method that you choose in here will drive the annotation numbering that will take place both in your plan and elevation views. Also within plan and elevation view, other areas of confusion was that whether items were shown or hidden or not, that would cause the annotation to update, which of course also caused confusion in the context of reporting. So now, regardless of what you show or hide, so for example, if we hide away our base units, the numbering system still remains unchanged. So the wall units will still remain numbered sort of 10 through to 15 here, and our hidden away base units will remain numbered as they were. So that way, when you produce a whole series of views that may show certain layers and not other layers, and you have a report, then all of the numbering across those views is entirely consistent and there is no confusion. The same thing applies equally in the elevation view. So again, in elevation, that's driven by the item list. If you turn on annotation, we could choose here to follow as planned, because that will effectively give you the same result. But all the numbering in the plan view all the numbering in the elevation and or the plan view will be driven by that single area, which is the item list view. So no scope for error, no scope for mislabeling. Everything now should be entirely consistent. And if we were to show the item list as well, then let's have a look, see if we have a view comprising an item list as well. So we have a perspective, plan, and item list. That will do. Or even better, an item list, elevation, and plan. And so what should happen now is anything that you choose in the item here. So we've got number 2. So number 2 is highlighted in the elevation view. If I went back to the plan and I turned back on my layers to show all of my layers, then so we have a highlighted item. So you've got full consistency. Anything you select in one view will automatically be selected with another view. The annotation index is entirely consistent. So we have 2, 2, and 2 here. Other elements that we've introduced, very difficult to demonstrate in a webinar, but you'll find for yourself once you've received version 6. In terms of zooming in on a design, we have many tools. We have obviously shortcut keys on the keyboard. We have a zoom mode here as well, but we've now extended that to also apply to a mouse wheel zoom. So you'll have to take my word for it. I am now zooming in with the mouse. And if I want to zoom in on a particular area, the mouse position will dictate where you're zooming into. So I'm scrolling the mouse forward to get to a given point, and then scrolling the mouse backwards to zoom back out to 100%. That applies in both plan and elevation views. So if I want to focus on my washing machine here, yeah, there we are. I'm zooming in on that and back out again. And it also applies in my perspective view as well. You might remember when we had a zoom type function in older versions of Fusion. It's a slight cheat because what it actually does, it just gives you a sort of a fisheye effect. If you zoom in and out, your viewing position is exactly the same, but it's just engineering a zooming in method. But that's exactly the same concept, scrolling in and out with the mouse. And again, once you get to 100%, you are restored to your full position. So again, some other nice little extras to again avoid you having to go to the ribbon where unless absolutely necessary. Okay. Well, I think just to give you an appreciation of some of the efforts, because obviously AI is working with a very, very simple design. B, waiting for a render to complete, even though we do have a really fantastic new optimized rendering system in terms of speed. We've got some example renders here which will just give you, hopefully give you an appreciation of what you will be able to achieve now. So here's the design that we used earlier in the demonstration using a daylight view. But these are all designs that have been created using version 6. No post-processing. They're all exactly as you would have seen on screen. They are all to the presentation plus quality. But some of these designs, as you can see here, I mean, this is a lovely example where not only do we have good glossiness in terms of the effect on the tiles and the effect in the cabinets, but we're also getting good textures on the leather on the seats here as well, and good detail on the inner workings of the ovens here as well. So, here are some others here where we have this is a very simple design, but we've got some good evidence of a wood grain here and some good detail on the tiling that we can see here, where the grout is very, very clearly sort of indicated. And again, some more good wood grain effect that we have here. Again, some more extreme examples. These are just bits of fun that we had to show off some marbling effects, but good colours. All the materials and all of the textures have been worked on very diligently in parallel with Fusion, so you really do get a good, strong effect. And also, not only have our own manufacturer catalogs been worked on, obviously our lighting catalog has also been worked on in parallel with that as well, to give you, I think, much stronger lighting effects than perhaps we had in the past, which is great to see. So here we are, a continuation of some of the designs, and again, we're getting good effects on sort of many elements here. Again, here's good display of the plinth lights in operation here. Good texture, good reflection here. We've got our interior cabinet lights in good operation there, and so on and so forth. Again, whether they're dark cabinets, matte or gloss, we really have a strong effect here. Interestingly, this one was done with just the lighting rig, if memory serves. And even in bathrooms, we have some good strong effects in the bathroom catalogs that we support as well. So here was a fun one that we did just in 2020 orange. Again, good reflections, good strong colors, and if you look at things like that we had called in to decorate the design from the cloud now, again, good refraction, good reflection too. So again, some more examples here. Good textures on our porcelains here. And then finally, you may not have yet seen it. Here's a fun design that we created for our cloud team. We've added some more Christmas decoration items into the design. So here's a simple design, and here's how it can look when fully decorated with some lovely stockings and bits and pieces there. And of course, this is a good example of what I was showing you before in terms of the power of producing compelling designs that will look good fully decorated, but if you just really want to declutter, then we have our lovely name view system that will allow you to just operate with the basics, of course. So that's all good too. So our hour is nearly up, incredibly, and I think I've shown you most of the key elements. If you feel that version 6 is a good opportunity to review your training needs, after all, if you're coming from a much older version, that may be something that you want to consider to get up to speed, or simply you may wish to advance from one of our bronze training course up to a silver or gold course. Of course, we have our lovely community. We have our forums for 2020 Fusion, so no doubt once version 6 is rolling out, this will be also a good opportunity for you to ask questions and share views on that. But I hope you enjoyed the presentation. More information will be available on the website. The Fusion product page will again contain more information about the features that I presented to you. But I hope you enjoyed this day's presentation. Enjoy the rest of your day, and happy Christmas and a prosperous New Year to you all. Thank you.